I think people are still joining, but I will use this as a cue to get going. So, as I say, welcome to today's webinar. We're so excited to have you here. This has been around 3 years in the making to be able to do this sort of publicly. So we are really just happy to share the work with everyone. So today's agenda, my name is Brooke Nolan. I'm the communications manager here at INHSU. I studied journalism at university in the UK too many years ago. And my first job, if ever you've seen those brightly coloured magazines like That's Life and Chat and Love It, in England we call them toilet magazines because they're that bad. I used to write for them as my first job. I lasted 9 months because of the disgusting things that I had to do to get stories and how unethical the work was. So since that time, I have kind of been an advocate for trying to do stories more ethically. And when I started with INHSU a few years back, I just saw this opportunity to work with our incredible community members and researchers to put something more formal together. So I will be running through the roadmap. We'll then be welcoming Kate Dunn, who will be sharing behind the scenes look of an Indigenous liver house awareness film. We'll then have Sarah Whipple, who will be sharing what it's like to share your story. And Sarah does incredible harm reduction work, but is also one of our Jude Byrne Emerging Female Leader Award winners, I think from last year, maybe the year before, 2024. And then we'll have Connor Ashley, who I'm sure many of you know. Connor's done a huge amount of storytelling work for us with our Connecting with Care films and My Choice, but also work all over the world, a trusted hands behind the lens. We'll then have an audience Q&A, so please do put questions in the box. We obviously won't get to all of them, but I will try to answer them afterwards as well in some follow-up materials in the next couple of weeks. And we'll be sharing the recording afterwards as well. Please keep yourself on mute if you can, as much as we like cute dogs and things like that. Hearing them in the background can be a bit confusing. So without further ado, why does storytelling matter? Well, I think I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but in health and advocacy, stories can influence policy, change public opinions, support political action and funding, and make research more human. There's actually statistics on this, but I won't share the statistics because it feels like a little bit of a mismatch. But there's statistics on how much more powerful stories are than statistics in terms of getting a point across and making things memorable. But storytelling also carries a huge responsibility, particularly when we're working with people with lived experience of using drugs or HIV and hepatitis C, or indeed anything else, really. So we need to support our storytellers. Many organisations want to share lived experience, but it can cause harm if it's rushed, extractive, shaped to fit a particular narrative, or shared without proper support. So often people are asked to be the story, but there's not enough control, consent, or care, or transparency about what could happen. So that's basically the germ of an idea of about 3 years ago that came from one of my first ever INSEE conferences, to develop a more structured approach to this. So the Ethical Storytelling Roadmap is a practical framework. It's aimed to help organisations to tell stories ethically. So you could give it to your comms teams, you can give it to your program managers, should definitely go to any external consultants that you're using who perhaps aren't used to working with communities that you do on a day-to-day basis. But we've also heard of people adding it to their training packages, etc. So it was co-designed across INSEE 2024 and INSEE 2025. So I hosted a discussion space in Athens, and it was one of the most, I felt so privileged to just be able to host it. The stories that were shared about the harm and the positivity that comes as someone with lived experience of sharing a story. And that led to the idea of saying, hey, we need to capture this. More people need to hear this. And that led to the workshop at INSEE 2025, where Sarah and Connor, who are joining us soon, they were facilitators, and we had incredible other facilitators. And basically we broke the storytelling process into 4 sections and mapped out what best practice looks like. So that's where it came from. Many voices captured into what I hope is a very easy to use graphic. And then I think the whole document's about 8 pages, but if you remember anything, print this off and it can act as a bit of a tick box. So the 4 stages are consent. So obviously that is before you even get started. Then we're moving on to the actual recording process. So when the story is being captured, that could be video. It could be a qualitative interview that's never going to go anywhere other than your own eyes. It could be setting up a media interview. It could be a case study. It could be any form that this person needs to share something with you. Then there's the actual publishing, if it is going public, so the moment it actually goes live. And then afterwards is the aftercare. And like I say, this came from the discussions from the last 2 years, but it also came from my work over the last 6 years, asking for people's stories as the marketing manager at INHSU and realizing that I could do better. So we're going to delve into each of those 4 areas. But in the document, when you get hold of it, if you haven't seen it, there's something called the 3 T's. So I love a little fun linguistic thing to help you remember. So the 3 T's are time, transparency, and trauma-informed. They're pretty self-explanatory, but if you look at each stage of the journey and apply that lens, then you're already going to be doing a lot more than people who aren't even thinking about this work. So stage 1 is consent. The most obvious thing here, and I have some good examples later, is to use plain language consent forms. How many times have we seen outside of storytelling consent forms this long, full of dense prose? You're under pressure and you go, is it all right? All right, yeah, sure, I'll sign. And it's so easy to do, but it's obviously not quite good enough. So look at your consent forms, and because it's a practical one, I have some examples. Really important to give time on this section. You know, it might be, hey, can you share your story? But what is the actual impact and reach of that story going to be? For example, if it's a video, it might be for your platforms, but that doesn't mean that it might not get picked up by someone else and go somewhere else. So you really need to think when you're asking people for consent around being transparent about what it is and the potential risks, and also giving them time to consider. So give as much time as you can so that they can think clearly about it. Check readiness, so emotional and psychological support. It came up really strongly in the workshop. Have peer support, have someone there who's told their story to say, hey, this is what it's like, this is what you need to think about. And think about how they want to be named and shared, and also discuss any compensation if that is something that is going to happen. Stage 2 is the actual recording, so the moment of sitting down to gather that story. Again, time, never rush. Don't be like, oh, I've got 20 minutes to dig down deep into your trauma and then I've got the next interview. You know, it should be have time to let people open up to you to build that trust. I'm sure Kate will touch on this later as well, because she has incredible stories around this, but build time for relationships, and Connor does it really well too. You know, eat, talk, don't just record and leave. Let storytellers lead what's being shared and continually ask, hey, are you okay? Do you need a break? Is everything okay? And just allow breaks, and obviously recording in somewhere private and calm. So stage 3 is publishing. So this is kind of just as you're going live, maybe a bit before, you know, not during the actual initial capturing of the story. Reconfirm consent during editing and also before publishing. So just say, okay, we're at the editing process, we're about to go live, because especially with organization timelines, we're like, oh yeah, we're going to get your story and it's going live next week. And then life happens and suddenly you're 3 months later, and when it goes live, they don't realize it's happening. So just really think about that kind of impact and that journey. Connor's great at this as well. I'm sure we'll touch on it, but show drafts and edit together so that they know how their voice is going to be used, because a 1-hour interview distilled into 60 seconds is never going to be the same takeaways. All the usual stuff as well. So non-stigmatizing, humanizing language. And a big one is in the middle there. Prepare for any online harm. This is something that you should have as an organization. You know, people are sharing stories that sometimes may have negative connotations outside of the world that we work in. So really be prepared to support them and make sure that as much is done as possible. And also something that came up in the workshops is translating to other languages, which has been a really interesting one. The language and terminology that we use can be quite technical from the harm reduction space, but also the slang terminology or the way that people refer to themselves when translated is worth thinking about having somebody actually in the space translate. So stage number 4, this is really important. So this 4 weeks later, with a different hat, a story that I wrote about PTSD a few years ago, there's a window of four weeks when PTSD can appear. So that's kind of why we got that in there as kind of a standard time frame. But also it came up during this workshop. We never heard from them again. They came, they did the story, and that was it. We never heard from them again. Check in, and it's not to check in if harm's being caused, just to check in to celebrate the work, to share the impact, and to see if everyone's okay. If needed, because sharing stories can be complicated, offer counselling. But if you had that peer from the beginning, then hopefully they can see the process all the way through. And it is about celebrating as well. You know, the negative side effects of storytelling hopefully outweigh the positive. The positive outweigh the negative. And also, again, these came up in the workshop. Clear withdrawal. So we have some really complicated, you know, beautiful films. But at any point, if someone withdraws their consent, we have Connor and some funding available to edit those films to withdraw consent. It's really important that that's part of your processes. And also manage long-term consent and legacy if someone dies as well, which is a complicated thing to deal with and something that we had to deal with. And there's never a one-size-fits-all as well. So it's about speaking to people who know people and organisations you've worked with, but just being aware that that is something that could come back. And just continually learn. So when in doubt, return to 3 questions. Are we giving enough time? Are we being transparent? And are we acting in a trauma-informed way that puts the person who's telling their story first, not the organisation? If not, pause and adjust. All right. Sorry, I talk fast. Putting the roadmap into practice. It's a lot of information. So what I'm trying to do here at INHSU is go, okay, this is a lot. So we're going to look at one stage of the journey. We're going to look at each stage of the journey and identify one thing that you can do. And already that will make the practices more ethical. So, for example, you could review your consent forms. That's stage 1. Another thing you could do is you could ask your videographers or whoever's capturing your story to include regular check-ins. That could go in your brief to them. You could give this document to the people that are capturing your stories as part of their brief. Number 3 is you could build into your processes that you share first drafts with storytellers. Or you could right now, anyone that you've recently gathered their story, pop a reminder in your calendar to check in with them in a month's time. These don't have to, it sounds like a lot, and it is, but there's really small things that can be done that can make a tangible difference. So I wanted to share one practical example, which is the consent form. So on the left is a consent form that I developed for INHSU a few years back, I think now, because again, the prose was quite complicated and long, and it had everything in there, but it wasn't the most user friendly. And Connor was actually doing on camera consent as well, which is another really good way of doing it. So reading and saying, do you confirm? But we still needed sorry if I've stolen things from your presentations, everyone, as well. But the tick box actually worked really well. So by ticking this box, I give permission to INHSU to. By ticking this box, I understand that INHSU may share the film with other individuals and will do their best to let me know. And the reason why it's like that is sometimes you don't have control. It's the internet. People can take your content. But during this webinar, I found this form, which actually now, best practice, I'm going, I think I might update them again. So this form on the right came from a organisation I've come across. I don't think they're doing much anymore, but they're called Ethical Storytelling. And I love the way they've laid their form out. So this second one here, I consent, check 1, to my image being used, to my image being obscured. I consent to my real name being used, to a pseudonym being used. And I really like the simplicity of the form, not just for people who are trying to decide if they want to share, but for you as an organisation to go, oh, yeah, this is great. So I'd say that's a great thing to start with. Moving on, progress, not perfection. So we are learning continually. I'd like to say that we've done this roadmap last December, I think it was launched, and that now we're perfect. We are absolutely not. I still make mistakes and do things that I wish I could do better. Stories travel further than you expect, particularly on social media. You can do your best to say, hey, this is for this campaign and this is what it's going to be used for. You don't know unless it's behind a paywall or behind a login. So really think that, a journalist with an agenda writing about harm reduction in your area quick Google, find something, boom. So really, that's not to scare anyone either. It's just a reality. So really just think about that, which is why the transparency and support is important. We rely a lot on the same voices. I think every not-for-profit and organization is under the pump. Sarah is wonderful, but I kind of feel I'm always like, Sarah, can you help? Because she's incredible and we have quite a few community voices. So something that we want to do as well is start trying to build up more people from the community to have the skills and confidence and knowledge to share their stories. So really think about that. We've actually ran a mentoring program a few years ago in Africa that did that, which was fascinating as well. And it takes time. One of the hardest things is we get an idea, oh my gosh, we need to do this amazingly. And because people are excited, everybody usually says yes, but that doesn't mean that it's best practice. So these are the learnings that I've come up with from trying to implement this roadmap. And sometimes the most ethical choice is not telling the story at all. So whether that is part of someone's story or because you are trying to get a narrative that actually they're not giving you and you're trying to make something fit, or because the person just doesn't want to, the person telling the story always comes first. Thank you so much. I am going to stop sharing. There will be a chance to ask questions at the end. Thank you so much. Oh, I see little claps and love hearts on the screen. Very kind. Thank you very much. But I have the absolute pleasure now to pass over to Kate Dunn. So Kate, if you could introduce yourself, and yeah, we're going to hear about basically ethical best practice as an organization or someone going in to try to get the story, I guess. So yeah, over to you, Kate, and thanks everyone.
Hello, and yeah, hello from my snowdrift actually. I just got about 90 centimeters of snow in the last couple days, so we're in the process of digging out. So, my name is Kate Dunn. I'm from Mississauga First Nation in Ontario, Canada. I also work with York University in the nursing school, and I wear a lot of different hats, which brings me into lots of different spaces and places. And hopefully, my role is to help bring relationality into those spaces and the power of culture and story and how it really can help all of us do better at what we do best. So, really excited to be here with people from all around the world. And the what connected me into this media space was when the rates of hepatitis C in parts of Alberta, Canada, went increased 1,200% between 2015 and 2018 in one area where there was a lot of Indigenous community presence. The Indigenous community there said, well, of course, no one is engaging with the cure that's available for hepatitis C treatment because no one has taken the time to explain to us why this is an important issue at a heart level. Everyone just hands us these literature pieces and expects us to engage at a head level. And I don't know if you're familiar with Indigenous cultures, but it really has to be a holistic approach. And that heart level engagement is where actual action is really inspired. So it was that call for help that really kind of propelled me into this space of, how can we tell story? How can we include the traditional way of teachings, which was story, is story? How do we kind of combine that with media? How do we put different people's perspectives into this? How do we combine with medical knowledge that really needs to be shared and also connect it to land-based stories, and those ways of sharing knowledge? So it was a bit tricky. It involved a lot of listening, a lot of collaborating, a lot of transdisciplinary connections, but it ended up being an incredible process, an incredible journey. And I would say, yes, the film was a success, but those relationships taught me even more than that film. And I think that is also a key learning that we all need to remember that we're never an expert in any of these spaces. We need to come into the space as a learner, with the clear intent of bringing reciprocity and respect into this space. What I can bring is one thing, but what you can bring probably has even more value. And it's us collaborating together that is going to really share messages forward and make a lot of positive change. And because I'm an Indigenous person and also a nurse, it kind of lands me in this place of double responsibility, which is fun and also very challenging. So together, and on the slide there, I think you can see the cameos of some of the people that were involved in this process. We really tried to engage with different stories and perspectives around hepatitis C and liver health, so that the heavy weight of this story wasn't just on people with lived experience, but we also engaged with people who were elders and knowledge keepers and people who had lived experience, but also Indigenous nurses and Indigenous doctors who are also in this space as well. So, really trying to share the weight of that story, and so that people could feel it from different angles, but it didn't just put all of the responsibility on one person either. And I think that really leaning in and listening to people telling stories and then who those people recommend and bring along with them. And then also realizing that sometimes story is not just the telling, but sometimes it's the doing. So, how are we connecting these words and these stories to the land, which is really, really important in a lot of cultures? In this case, maybe it's beading. A lot of stories are passed along, so teachings are passed along when we're doing things with our hands. So beading is definitely something where a lot of that can happen. So people have started beading hepatitis C viruses, or you can see in the slide here, beading a liver. And it really helps to illustrate while teachings are happening, this is what the liver looks like. This is what a virus looks like. Yes, we can make friends with this virus. It's in your body. But we need to learn to better understand it and share these stories so that then we can engage at that heart level and take steps to engage in treatment. Some of the other visuals there are like a happy liver, sad liver, conversation starter card. And we also created some cards that talk about the plant medicines that are in this area and how those can be used to help support liver wellness as well. So just some examples of how collaborating with different perspectives using visual tools as media while we're telling story together, while we're having that reciprocal exchange of knowledge and really honoring that time that we spend together. Um, from an organizational standpoint, I think that most organizations do not take into consideration the amount of time that you really need to build relationship and also building into budgets the need for honoring that reciprocity. Sometimes people don't like to incentivize engagement in storytelling, but it's really important to consider that within many cultures around the world, gift giving is a part of culture. And by honoring this exchange of information, it's totally appropriate to give back something as well. They're giving you a lot of stories, perspectives, inspirations, and their wisdom and experiences. And we absolutely should be giving something back in that spirit of reciprocity. So, storytelling should start in relationship. We should really be leaning in to listen to, okay, this is the story we thought we were coming into looking at, but really, you're telling me that there's this and this and this. That's probably where the real story is. And we need to not come in with our pre-directed script and time length and all of these things, but an open heart to okay, this is what we thought the main storyline would be, but can you share what you feel the storyline should be? Or how can we add depth and value and relevance as we engage and as we listen? I think probably the hardest part of being an organizational storyteller is being ready to listen so well that it blows your idea completely away, and you have to start over with what people are sharing is the real storyline and the real need, and then following along so that you are building that capacity so that the true story that is going to land and provide that real inspiration, that you can be the catalyst to make sure that that happens. And in that process, really focusing on building stories around hope and healing and connection, and not just this is the disease or this is the thing or here's the blame. Stories are really strongest when they are building hope and healing and directing people in how to build connections with each other. So don't be afraid to collaborate. Don't be afraid to co-create, and really take the time to listen and build those relationships because it will benefit your story and the story overall, and stories that can be told going forward in a lot of different spaces and places. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was, yeah, just fascinating to hear the entire project. And yes, second time I've had the chance to hear your story of your storytelling as well. And I always learn something new. So the film link is in the chat, but we'll also be sharing that as well after the webinar, alongside resources from our other speakers as well. But for now, it's my pleasure to hand over to, I think we have Sarah next. So Sarah, if you're happy to share your slides, and then, yeah, introduce yourself and over to you.
Hi, yes, can you see my slides?
We can indeed.
Okay, sweet. Hello, my name is Sarah Whipple. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm going to be talking today about some of the impacts of storytelling on people who use drugs and things you should think about when you're inviting people into your projects. Before we get started, this is a very short presentation. We'll not cover everything. We'll not cover your specific project, your specific local context, and so really couldn't recommend enough hiring people who use drugs on your storytelling team, or at very least as consultants, to kind of understand some of the more nuances with your specific projects. That said, I'm just going to kind of cover what some of the more universal risks are. And the next few slides are going to be a bit depressing, but I think it's important that we take seriously what we're asking people to do when we're asking people to share their stories. For people who use drugs, telling their stories is admitting to a crime, essentially, and that has obviously a lot of consequences, even if it isn't directly incarceration. Everything on this slide are things that I have seen happen in real life to people experiencing incarceration, police harassment, loss of work, loss of housing, because of the way that their story was shared online. And something very tangible immigration consequences can happen, not just now. All of these things can happen years and years and years down the line, right? When you're telling a story with attached to someone's name, you know that their landlord, their employer is going to see it in 10 or 15 years. It's a very serious thing to agree to. Some of these comments on the left is from one of the most popular, I hate to use the word storytelling, platforms about people who use drugs, definitely not for people who use drugs. I'm not even going to say the name of it. I don't want to spread it around, but it has like 7 million followers on YouTube. They pay people $20 to share their trauma for half an hour. And recently they interviewed a woman who was pregnant and using drugs. And these are 4 of thousands of comments. The woman intended to keep her baby, and there are thousands of people making sure that would never happen for her, right? So really, I mean, she consented to being on film. She was paid for it. The photographer can say that they did their job, but this is going to have a really devastating impact on her and her family's life, and something that needs to be taken very seriously. We also need to take into consideration that this can lead to distrust amongst people's communities, right? Your dealer might not want to deal to you if they think that you have a spotlight on them. It's like a very tangible risk. People can be outed as a drug user to their family or social networks. Another thing that's important to consider amongst people who use drugs is a very high representation of people fleeing domestic violence, trafficking, gangs, homophobic or transphobic families, other violent situations. And again, very much seen it happen that people are found by people that they don't want to be found by because of storytelling projects. And then, people's physical safety can be jeopardized by that. And there's another scenario too that a former coworker of mine gave me permission to share. But she was profiled in an international newspaper. A film crew came to her camp, and that spread the word that she was rich now, or that she had connections to wealthy people, even though she did not make $1 off of that project. And she was robbed many times after that because of that perception, right? Which is not something that the filmmakers intended at all, but it's something that happened, and we're going to talk about later about how that was handled. But on top of the very serious physical risks, there are a ton of emotional risks. I'm not going to go through every bullet point here, but one kind of story that comes to mind in the United States, if you're familiar with, his name's Gaetan Dugas. He was in the early days of HIV epidemic. He was very brave and compassionate towards his community, and he shared his sexual history with researchers in order to help them understand HIV. It was crucial for the early days of HIV research, and the media kind of took that and turned it into that he had given the United States AIDS, which obviously was untrue, but he was villainized in the media up until his death, right? And I think this kind of a parallel, extreme example, but a parallel, I think, to a lot of when a lot of people who use drugs share their story, they're not doing it for themselves, right? They're doing it because they want to change laws, they want to disrupt stigma, they want to make the world a better place for their loved ones, right? And so it's something that people do because out of a sense of selflessness, but it can absolutely be turned around and have a lot of very serious consequences on people. It is pretty devastating to see yourself described in some of these ways. I mean, I have pretty thick skin, and sometimes, you know, seeing yourself described with such like vitriol, you know, even if not by the piece itself, but by the reaction to it, can be pretty devastating. We talked about people being tapped to share their story over and over. And then a lot of times what I see is that you're either going to be villainized or maybe you'll get a sympathetic perspective. But in order for you to get sympathy, you're going to have to explain a lot of your trauma and like justify why you're a drug user and like look in order to like look sympathetic, which is another kind of stigmatizing paradigm. So, you know, really important to understand like how people want their stories to be represented. And I think really echoing what the presenters before me said about, you know, being able to scrap things, change the direction. All of that said, and I know I spent a lot of time on risks, but I think it's so important to take them seriously. And it is important to take them seriously when we're having these discussions with people about whether they want to participate in the project. They need to understand that all of these things can happen and it might be out of your control that it happens. And more importantly, they need to understand what you can and cannot offer them if and when these things happen. I told you about my former coworker who was attacked after being, and she reached out to the journalist and asked them to pay for a hotel room for her safety, and they said no, right? And so maybe that I have my own feelings about that, but maybe that's your policy. Maybe that's something you can't do within your institution, but then you need to be really clear with people up front. If you can't provide them a lawyer, if you can't provide them housing, if you can't provide them a therapist, when these things happen, then that needs to be part of the consent process, and people need to know that they will not have support. Otherwise, it's not informed consent. I absolutely agree. Compensation is a very important tool. People deserve to be compensated for their stories, but it can also be a form of exploitation, right? Talked about people being offered $20 to share their trauma. It can be the money should never be the only thing driving people to tell their stories. And there's also power imbalances. As a service provider myself, I have my personal boundaries that I have never asked anyone I provide service to tell their stories, right? Like, I think I control their access to a life-affirming service. I don't think that there's a way to get consent. It's a complicated discussion. There are ways to do it. That's my personal boundary, but it's just something to consider, right? Is the power balance? Do you control this person's access to medical care or other services? And we'll end on, I don't want you to think that there's no hope. Obviously, it's super important to do. I feel like I try not to discourage anyone from doing this. There are ways to tell stories ethically. You know, I think the roadmap covers a lot of this really beautifully, offering people protections like fake names, disguised voice, no face, B-roll while they're talking, understanding what they want out of their story being framed, deleting hateful comments, and, you know, I'll started with it and I'll end with it, having people who use drugs really being involved in your team beyond just subjects, because they will be able to inform every step of the process in that way. Okay, thank you so much. And on that note, you know, INHSU has allowed me to be part of their storytelling team. And thanks for putting that trust, and thanks for having us, and excited to hear what Connor has to say.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I've got chills hearing from the speakers today. We just really appreciate your honesty. And there's actually a couple of comments in the chat saying, you know, the transparency around the risks. It's really important because obviously we need stories, we need advocacy to be able to fight for basic human rights. And also it can be a really empowering process to tell your story as well. But these are real risks that we all have a responsibility to try to mitigate. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our final speaker, Connor, who, as I say, is an incredible visual storyteller, has worked with us on many projects. If you've been to one of our conferences, you've seen Connor running around all over the place, capturing photos and films. So yeah, over to Connor to find out what it's like to be the person behind the lens, or with that notepad kind of, you know, trying to open these stories up. Over to you, Connor.
Thanks, Brooke. I'm just going to share my screen here. It's going to allow me to do that. Okay, it's not allowing me to share. So could I ask if someone on the back end could maybe put up that presentation?
You're muted, Brooke?
Brooke, sorry, you're on mute. I'm not sure if
I'm just opening that up now.
Awesome.
Apologies.
Thank you.
My gut instinct to have a backup plan was was the right one. Give me 1 second and I'll share this.
So everyone, today I'm just going to quickly talk about in kind of 3 different sections my experience as someone who has the opportunity and the privilege to work with community and tell stories. Behind the lens, I guess that I am coming at this as someone who has worked in harm reduction, not for that long, probably just on a decade, maybe a little bit longer. That's been in Australia as well as in communities in North America, Middle East, parts of Southern Africa as well, and Europe. So in this presentation today, I guess what I'm hoping to really get across to people is that if you are either someone that's interested in storytelling and using the tools, or you're interested in, working with someone who is going to use the tools of storytelling, I think that there are some important ways to maybe consider your process as much as you consider your output. So next slide, please. Can I do that? So ethical decision making during storytelling. So next slide. Thanks, Brooke. This is, for me, what I wanted to put forward to everyone around, this is the formal framework that I have. It's not actually like a little bit of paper that I print out, but it's more kind of, when I was thinking about it, what are the things that guide me and what I do? And so Brooke talked a lot about this, consent in a literal form in terms of a sign-off, from an organizational perspective, yes. But at an interpersonal level, it's really important. That's literally the verbal consent. It can be all of those the body language cues, but consent is a linear thing. It's not a once off, we're good to go. And all of these things are impacted by time. They're impacted by what we want to achieve as well. So I want to go through this, but I also want to note that we as a storyteller, I see these as being incumbent upon us. So the second one here is around shared decision making. So yep, you got consent done. You've got that paperwork tick. But the reality is that, decision making, and I have at the end, if my new slides come through to Brooke, I can chuck up. But, I think of it as like a continuum between when you start a process at the very birth of an idea, that very seed, through to that very end, is that decision making has lots of little dots along the way. And they're all opportunities for community, for people that are taking part in that process to contribute to decision making. Sorry, just go back one, really quickly. And then I wanted to say, so authenticity, that is about me and how I approach storytelling. No doubt there is opportunities and times where we will use, visual recreation, or we might even ask someone to come and stand in the instance that we want not our individual to be visually depicted. And it's not that I'm considering that not authentic or I'm considering it inauthentic. That's not the case. What I'm saying is being really honest. And again, sharing that decision making with whoever it is that you're working with, so that you guys or you crew can make a decision around how you're going to work together to achieve, what it is you want to do. And that fourth one is that organizational policy and approach. Some orgs are not going to have any formal policies because I've never done a participatory storytelling project, or maybe that they had someone who worked in a specific way previously. So they are helpful, but how they shake down into reality is another matter entirely. I do always lean on those and I look to learn from them. But ultimately, it's me that gets the opportunity to work with community. So I have to think about how that practically shakes down when I'm looking to, embody consent by checking in constantly and by looking at how we're going to make decisions together. Okay, so just moving on, next slide. Thank you. So this is a part of a photo essay of Ron, who is an amazing naloxone educator, works for PHR, Prairie Harm Reduction, up in Saskatoon. And so I had the opportunity, for example, when I was doing work with Katie, as well as INHSU in Canada. I got to spend most of the day with Ron. And why I'm going to, I guess, go to the next photo, please. I wanted to highlight this to show that, you know, how we photograph people, how we then choose to use those images is really important. Next photo, please. Now, these are all just some of the different photographs that, you know, I made with Ron. And we made them together. Sure, I have the camera, and sure, at times he was not looking directly at the camera, but it is, as I said, it is a shared decision making. You know, this last one was a mural on the wall, and I asked him, said, "Hey, Ron, man, do you want to come jump over here? Do you want to get that naloxone kit? Come stand here, because this is what you are for sure." And we took that portrait. You know, we're inside his house having a cup of tea because we needed a break. It was hot. It was the middle of summer. You know, I said, "This is great. Can I get a photo with you and your dog here?" You know, and he said, "Yeah, no worries. Go for it, buddy." So, you know, we were sitting there chatting, having a cup of tea. And, you know, I made a number of portraits, but just wanted to give a sense of how these are different photographs throughout time spent with someone. Next slide, please. These are now those informal decision making. I talked about those formal ones. These are these informal ones. And for me, I was thinking about, consent, shared decision making, you know, but authenticity. But these are then the things that I do, which are outside the scope of my work. And I'm only telling this to people because maybe you're really stuck on how to navigate working with community when you know you need to advocate and tell stories. So staying connected. And this is something that's really important to me. It's not probably always going to work for a lot of different people for very understandable reasons around personal privacy, boundaries of work. But for me, as someone who's an independent storyteller that works really closely with people at an individual level, when people do suggest or ask, "Hey man, can I stay in touch with you?" The answer is always yes. Always. Whether that's, you know, a phone number for WhatsApp, whether that's people go, "I'm on Instagram, can I follow you on Instagram?" Whatever that may be, for me, that is a yes. Now, I have to maintain that, and if that relationship, you know, at stages might be tricky, like that's for me to have to navigate. But I find that if I'm asking anything of anyone, then I need to be open to the fact that if they want to stay connected to me, then that is always a yes. Doesn't mean that it's not going to always be, you know, a relationship where they might want to ask something of me or ask advice or want me to support them, but that's a yes. So I'm lucky to have, you know, my Facebook messengers and Instagram, you know, is chatting with people from around the world. It means you find out or you don't when people pass. So you have all of these other implications, but that is for me a yes. Checking back in. That is a great thing to do. Brooke mentioned it again about that continuum along the process. And that can be, "Hey, Ron, these are my favorite photos. What do you reckon? I love this one," you know, and I'll got some examples. That finally listening to your gut. If it doesn't pass the gut test, then it's something that you probably need to, you know, reconsider. Next slide. I've got to keep moving along quickly. So power dynamics between storyteller and subject. So that's me and Rick. Rick couldn't read real well, so we spent ages doing that consent form. I reckon we spent half an hour. That was one of Rick's mates who took that photo on their phone and sent it to me. But that was just the time we spent to do that consent up in the Hunter Valley in Newcastle. Next slide, please. So this is a project that we did. It's on INHSU's website. It's called My Choice, but exploring people's personal choice around using opioids or being on a pharmaceutical program such as methadone, such as Suboxone, such as long-acting depot buprenorphine. And so people were invited to photograph what it was that spoke to them around their choice. Now, that top left is a portrait of of Heather's best friend, Pat, that was taken with Pat's permission. But all of these photos are different examples of the photos that people took. Next slide. In parallel to me working with participants in that project was also then working with a different group of participants, some of whom also did the participatory photography. But this second group of people that were really comfortable to share their experience of their personal choice, whether that be Suboxone for 10 years, whether that being, you know, dropping in and out of different programs, whether that being never being on a program. And so Sarah talked, and really importantly, about the risk. And I saw a lot of comments about different jurisdictions around the world, the different risks that people face. But when people understand what is, I guess, the opportunity or what it is that we're looking to talk on, I always would refer to people's, I guess, own agency, and that would be explaining how it is that we're going to talk about that. Some people don't want to talk about it directly, but we talk about it indirectly. Some people want to talk about it in past tense. Some people want to get someone else to stand in visually. So there's so many ways, but I think that Sarah had a lot of good things, even for me to keep reminding myself of. But this point is around being a parallel process. A participatory one is really important, more important than my work. But we also know for the other kind of advocacy or comms goals that we will also do that work alongside. Next slide, please. I'll just move along really quickly. So practical advice in navigating pressures, choice and responsibility. Next slide, please. So next slide, for example, this is one of my good mates. We met doing a project for a service on hepatitis C reinfection. We met doing a participatory storytelling project back 6 years ago. And our relationship it's awesome. We've stayed in touch. I have been able to work with Felicity, getting them involved in a number of projects for their experience and their ideas, whether that's on camera, whether that's not, but that's helping to, ferment ideas for projects. And I've also been doing a portrait project with Felicity on their journey as they've been growing and transforming in their identity over the last 4 years. So, we'll make a couple of portraits using my old film camera, but that's our relationship. These are all photos that they share on their social media far before I ever share. So that's just an example of how that relationship can live long beyond a project that might only be a month or two. Next slide. This is another example of Simon and Kim, who I met through a different project, and that was around pharmaceuticals and personal choice. And so, they were a couple that recently had hooked up. That's a portrait framed print of theirs that I took them down in the bottom right corner. I had a message from Simon just the other day saying that, Kim's received housing in a part of Sydney. He's worked as a delivery driver for the last 3 years. He'll comment a lot on my Instagram, especially when I'm away for traveling. So that's just an example of how our relationship has, expanded beyond the purpose of that project. And then I think, next slide, please. So I didn't put in the slides because I wasn't ready in time, and I'm sorry because it's early in Australia and I like to sleep in. But these last 2 slides, what I wanted to show was participation is like a ladder. The top of the ladder is that opportunity for anyone who participates in a project to be able to actively and meaningfully contribute to what decisions made. And the bottom end of that ladder is no participation. And every step along the way is from really bad or no participation through to really high participation. And so that's what I try to always consider is how much participation, how much decision-making is community having in this moment? And then the other part is that longitudinal line. So from the very beginning of a project through to the very end. And I am always trying to weigh this up between the time that we have, what we're trying to achieve, all of those factors between how much participation someone has and, over that whole journey. And then finally, I had a little pie chart, not because I'm an accountant, but because I was wanting to show that when you think about all of what you want to do, you might decide that visual storytelling is actually way too risky. You might want to look at something with animation and AI because you've got someone who's got those skills. You might want to look at podcasts. There's so many different mediums that I would recommend people look at. So yeah, that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Connor. And I love that visual of the ladder. Maybe we can chat afterwards and see if we can do something with that for you. I think, a lot of you know Connor, and it's a very unique approach, I think, that you take, Connor. I think the personal relationships that you build with people, it is testament to the work that you come out with as well. So thank you so much for sharing kind of your inner process. We have about 8 minutes left, so please do pop some questions in the chat for us. I have a few questions here as well, so I'm going to start with these, but yeah, send questions through in the chat if you have them. So just because you've just been chatting, Connor, tell us a little bit around that gut instinct that you talked about, because I think as an organisation, it's all well and good that I can sit there behind my screen and be like, this is what I want, and be nice and be kind, but realistically, it's you that's there getting that story, and your gut instinct is what's going to guide that along, with the community member. How do you personally decide when not to tell a story or not to tell a part of a story, even when it might make it more impactful or compelling?
Yeah, I think that often the vast majority of You know, when you sit down to have a yarn with someone and they feel comfortable, and I think everyone in this room, whether that's in a formal storytelling or it's just in your capacity supporting someone, when you sit down to spend time with someone, people feel comfortable, they will share. Now, you need to weigh up whether you go, sorry, I don't want to hear about that because we're only talking about hepatitis C reinfection. Sorry, I can't hear about that. That's not my approach at all. Like, I'm not going to try to corral or block someone into only talking to me in certain blobs or windows of information. So there is, though, something that happens after that. That is, you end up hearing a lot more about someone's life, which is the reality, than, say, just their hepatitis C reinfection, because we all know that doesn't live in the silo. So what do you do with that? I think that if you've been clear from the outset that the project is about hepatitis C reinfection, but people have shared in these ways, I would acknowledge and say, thank you so much for sharing. And I would love, you know, if you want to have a chance to have access to this interview, but I want to be just really clear that because we're only doing this on hepatitis C reinfection, a lot of what you've shared is something that I won't be able to use. And if I did use anything outside of that, which I will be doing anyway, I will give you a heads up in advance. So I think the thing is that I would say that 90% of people's stories don't get used out of protection, out of the fact that it's kind of gone and grown beyond the scope. I can think of so many people who have shared so much, but for all of those reasons, it's not even considered that we would share that. But I am not going to stop someone in the process of sharing mid-flow if that's something that they want to do.
Yeah, I love that take as well, I think. And probably something we haven't included in anything at the moment is that kind of giving space to share and being honest about what isn't going to be included as well as what is. I think that's a nuance perhaps that hasn't come out in, you know, until this conversation. So thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, I'm going to work around my screen because that's how you're laid out for me. Sarah, as somebody who I guess has bridged both sides, working for organisation and sort of being the person sharing your story, what do you see as the biggest gap between organisations trying their best to cause no harm and what actually happens under pressure when we need story, we've got funding, we've got grants to apply? What's that biggest gap and how could people mitigate it?
Totally. I think a couple of things immediately come to mind. One is that I think that the people here are obviously not wanting to portray people who use drugs as villainized lights, right? I think the people here, so you assume that like your intention is going to be the impact, right? Like I want to present this person in a, you know, nuanced way that's in accordance with their values, etc., and not considering that that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the impact of the project is going to be for them. You know, that doesn't mean that's what the comment section is going to be like. That doesn't mean that's what their landlord's going to see when they see the video. So I think that there can be a gap there between people thinking, well, I'm going to portray them well, and then not doing that like next step to like, okay, but even if I'm going to, you know, do all of the right things, like what can still happen. And then I think, you know, it's not a surprise to anyone, not anything groundbreaking, but time is obviously a big deal, right? That's, you know, we talked about the 3 T's, right? Like time is like such a big part of it, but in concept, I think a lot of people agree with that, and in practice, they just don't book the time, right? And I see this so much with like media. How many times I've gotten a call being like, okay, our deadline's tomorrow, like can you share your story by tomorrow? And I'm like, well, like, you know, there's just absolutely no way that that can be rolled out in a like ethical way. So right, like when you're, and I get the funding as part of it, so just putting those bumpers into, like you said, maybe if you have budget for re-editing and if you take more time, maybe that means you'll tell less stories, like, and that's just something that you're going to have to be okay with, you know. And there is no way to do the same volume and also all of the things that need to happen. So I think that people have to kind of make those trade-offs, which is hard in a deadlines and capitalistic world, but I think is something, you know, people is just necessary if this is going to be done well.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think internally, as you know, I work for INHSU, so everyone's lovely, so it's a bit different for me. But I think internally as a comms person as well, being really realistic, yes, I'm going to try to do this for you, but this comes first. So I think there's this whole kind of triage level. I've got time for one more question. I can see a couple of comments in the chat about staying connected with speakers and other resources. I'll check in with everyone afterwards and see the best way to do that. Consent first. So we will come back to you on that. And I've also seen a comment about, I think there was one in there about potential mentoring for new storytellers. We have run a program like that before. It was a very small pilot program, but I'll see what I can dig out, and also I will ask our speakers and other people of any resources that they have. So yes, we'll do that. But I've got one last question, which I'm going to ask to you, Kate. So I really loved what you share about you had this dual responsibility as a nurse and as, you know, an Indigenous person. And I think you got to see in your project that you have seen the harm that's come from extractive and, you know, extractive processes in the past for storytelling. And I think that what you did was so incredible. And I guess I want to know, when you know that you're going into a community that hasn't had great experiences before you even get there, what do you want people to be thinking? Like, what do you want people to be thinking? If that's the last thing people remember from this webinar, so no pressure.
I think that what comes through in the story is also what you are feeling and what energies you take into that moment. I think that's really important. So I think that even though we only think that the direction of the lens is what's going to come through in the story, it's really important for us as storytellers, story keepers, story gatherers, people who are trying to, what we think is, you know, doing best what we think for everybody. But we have to really examine our own bias and our own positionality and our own privilege and our own voices. And maybe that even means engaging with ceremony or doing some sort of an activity with the people who we will be engaging with so that we can feel their journey and their story in a way more personal and level playing field kind of perspective, and really humble ourselves and our privilege and kind of check all that at the door and go in with a lot of humility. That's when the true spirit of story comes through, and we will learn from it, but the audience will learn from it, and the person who's telling the story will probably learn and be able to share more freely if it's, you know, our energies and our baggage isn't blocking that process. So I think that's something that before we even do the actual story collecting, if you want to say, it's really important to examine ourselves and make sure we aren't the ones stopping an incredible thing from happening.
Wow, I don't think we could have asked for a better thing to end on. That was beautiful. And I think, yeah, just a huge thank you to all of our speakers, to every single person from the last 2.5 years who has been involved in the conversations and the creation of the roadmap, and to all of you for coming along today. So we hope that we'll be doing more in this space in the future. And until then, please do reach out, brooke.nolan@INHSU.org with any questions, and we'll be sending the recording soon. We're ending 30 seconds before timeline as well, so we can all go have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea where you are in the world. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a beautiful day or evening. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you. Bye.